What can I say? I was dumbfounded. My wife Maggie had just dropped a big bomb on me, or rather, two big bombs. Mac, we need to talk, she said when I got home from work. She was still dressed in the business suit she wore when she worked as an accountant. I was dressed in the overalls I wore when I worked overseeing my chocolate business. I am Angus McDougall, and my wife is Margaret Sullivan McDougall. Yes, she hyphenates her last name. Pretty pretentious if you ask me. But whatever. She's called Maggie. I'm Scottish. She's Irish. Of course, that should have been the first clue that we weren't right for each other, but damn. I fell in love with her golden blonde hair, green eyes, and stunning body at first sight. We had met 10 years earlier when I had just served in the Army, and we were going to college together. She was 18 and I was 22. I was using the GI Bill to get a culinary degree, and she, of course, was going for the aforementioned accounting degree. For some strange reason, we found common ground. Perhaps it was the fact that she was a chocolate connoisseur, and I wanted to make chocolates, cookies, and generally anything chocolate, come to think of it. My mom was partial to chocolate, as many women are. It was a seller's market, and chocolate was always in high demand. And while most businesses have the bulk of their sales at Christmas, chocolatiers can make money all year round. Christmas, of course, but also Valentine's Day, Easter, Independence Day, etc., etc., etc. Valentine's Day is on par with Christmas in terms of demand for chocolate, and my little chocolate shop factory does more orders on Valentine's than Christmas in most years. Oh, and I hate my name. Angus. Seriously, Mom? You had to go and call me goddamn Angus? I introduce myself as Mac to everyone. Nobody calls me Angus, not even my wife. Okay, Mom and Dad call me Angus, but only when they're mad at me. The rest of the time, I'm Mac. So, Maggie just told me we need to talk. I immediately tensed up, because every person on Earth knows what those 4 words in one sentence mean. We know it, and we are afraid of it. We need to talk has been a harbinger of breakups and divorces since time immemorial. So it was with a sense of impending doom that I sat down at the table and looked at her. I knew my world was about to collapse around me. 10 years together. 8 of them in a happy marriage. Well, I was happily married. I believed the same thing Maggie did. I went over in my mind the possible reasons for what she was about to say. Sex? No way. We had a great life. Money? I don't think so. I was making 6 grand a year clean, almost $250,000 after everything was taken care of with overhead, payroll for my employees, taxes, and so on. We were doing very well. Our combined income was about $375,000 a year. We were not poor. Lack of love? Not on my part. I loved her with all my heart and soul. Maybe she fell out of love with me somewhere along the way? Hell, we had just talked about starting a family a week ago. She interrupted my musings by handing me an ill-fated envelope across the kitchen table as I sat down at the table. Maggie, please tell me this isn't what I think it is. I looked at her, and her face turned into a studying mask that gave nothing away. I'm sorry, Mac, she said quietly. I should have talked to you sooner, but I want a divorce. Why? I asked with a lot more calmness in my voice than I felt at that moment. It's complicated, she mewed, averting her gaze. You met someone else. I must have been shocked, since I still hadn't gone into a rage. Yes, she said even quieter, barely audibly whispering. And for how long? I asked. God, what was wrong with me? I should have been standing and seething, strutting back and forth, calling her anything but a child of God. I should have threatened that asshole she traded me for. I should have felt anything but numb. 8 months? She said. I closed my eyes. 8 months, I repeated. You've been cheating on me for 8 goddamn months, and the first thing I hear about it is that you want a divorce. I shrugged. I guess you're going to take me to court. Since alienation of affection isn't favored here in California, I don't stand much of a chance. No, Mac. She shook her head slowly. Your case is yours, not mine. I inherit the house from my grandparents, but I'll give you a few days to vacate it. After you find a place of your own, of course. I'll require minor alimony until I'm married. But nothing ruinous. I sighed. Do I know him? I asked. If you harm him in any way, you will end up in jail. She said it unnecessarily. It wasn't that I didn't want to set him up, but I didn't want to lose my business either. I know that. But I think I have a right to know who's been twisting my horns for the last 8 months. I shrugged. Reginald Pennington, she said, holding her head straight. Son of a bitch. That, friends, was bombshell hash 2. I already hated him, even before this. Now I was mad as hell. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath to calm myself down. Reginald goddamn Pennington. Blonde, blue-eyed, mega-rich from old money, Hitler's ideal of the master race. Well, so on and so forth. Oh, and an ultra-snob with racist tendencies a mile long. I warned Maggie about him after we had dinner with him discussing some charities we were involved in at the time. She laughed at my warning and said he was harmless. Yes, he is. Harmless as a rattlesnake. We met him at a fundraiser in our neighborhood, and even then I didn't like the way he looked at Maggie. He looked at me with contempt and at her with pure lust in his eyes. Barely controlling my anger, I was finally able to look Maggie in the eye again. Well, I guess there's not much I can do about it. I shrugged as nonchalantly as I could. I wish it hadn't come to that, Mac. She smiled sadly, and I realized it was an act. She was just trying to ease my pain. But I could see that it was real. It's a lie, Mags, I said flatly. My brain was already working on a plan. But be that as it may, I'm not going to contest the divorce since it's the way you say it is. I'll have my lawyer go over the papers with me before I sign them. She nodded. I wouldn't expect anything less, Mac. Just so you know, you didn't do anything, and you didn't do anything. Reginald and I just matched on a soul level. I do love you, but I love him. I'm really sorry about the way things turned out, Mac. What nonsense. She was in love with his money. His family is worth billions. That night at the charity ball we attended, he danced a little too close to Maggie, and as they parted ways, I noticed him correcting himself as she walked back to our table. I knew for a fact that he didn't have enough money to satisfy her in bed. But since I didn't want to rock the boat just yet, I just said, I'm sorry too. After that little conversation, she handed me a manila envelope. You'll be formally served in the morning, Mac. I'll meet you and my attorney at Tim's office. This is just a preview of what I want to get out of the settlement. She was referring to Tim Grayson, my best buddy since high school and my attorney in every case since I started McDougal's chocolate factory. You know what? Get rid of the alimony and it's done. Reggie's rich. You don't want my money, do you? I knew it was unlikely, but hell, she owed me at least that much. She seemed to be thinking about it. Hell, if she agreed, I wouldn't even have to put into action the plan that was already half-formed in my head. No, Mac. I need to get something out of all this. After all, I spent 10 years of my life on you. Oh, hell no. This declaration that our entire marriage and all of our time together while we were dating and engaged was just a waste of her time drove me on. I looked at the proposed alimony and raised one eyebrow. She wanted $2,200 a month in alimony for 2 years or until she remarried, whichever came first. That was about half of what I was making per month after overhead and paying my employees. I could live on that, and I had more than enough savings in a personal savings account. I pretended to mull it over. Great! I guess it'll be worth it in the end. Finally, I shrugged. I'm going to go pack. I'm leaving tonight. And I left. I packed a suitcase and a bag with clothes, toiletries, and other stuff. I also packed my extensive music CD collection, which included everything from Marty Robbins to Metallica to Mozart. Yes, it covered all of those genres. Heck, I even had Sir Mix-a-Lot in there, just for grins and grins. I loaded it all into the Bullet, my 1968 Mustang Fastback 390 GT, and went from there. I left in less than an hour and called Kat's cell phone as soon as I was on the road. Hey, Mac. How's it going? Kat answered on the second ring. Kat, I've just been kicked out, and I'm going to be served with divorce papers in Tim's office in the morning. Maggie is splitting, at least in her mind. I snorted, the bitterness finally coming through in my voice. Shit. Are you kidding me? She was as shocked as I was. No, I'm staying at the Holiday Inn until I find a place to live, I replied. Oh, hell no. Get your ass to me right now, Mr. Man. She was, as she put it, ghettoizing me. Great. Yes, ma'am? I chuckled in spite of myself. Good. I'll see you when I see you. She ended the conversation and I couldn't help but smile and shook my head sorrowfully. Katrina Monroe is my manager at the chocolate factory. She looks a lot like Aisha Tyler, only a little younger, but just as tall. 6-foot Nubian goddess. We all call her Kat, and she doesn't mind. Her boyfriend, Darius Jackson, plays for the Los Angeles Dodgers, which makes him cool in my book. He was currently on an 8-game road trip and should be back sometime next week. This gave me the opportunity to spend a few nights at Kat's place in her guest room until his return. Hell, Darius was okay with that, so I could stay longer. No, I needed to find my own place. Hell, I could buy an inexpensive house with the money I had in the bank. But then, the 50-50 division of community property hadn't happened yet. Damn. Yeah, I might have to rent an apartment for a while before I could afford my own house again. My thoughts were interrupted when I realized I was not far from Kat's house. Her boyfriend only stayed there occasionally, but he kept urging Kat to move in with him in LA. At first, she wanted him to make the whole commitment, like the ring on her finger. So I was 32 years old, still in good shape, already a millionaire, but I got shit-canned and wiped out by the woman I fell in love with and married. My future ex-wife, cheater and gold digger. I pulled up to Kat's house and parked next to her little Ford Fusion. I swear to God, that little car was chickening out in fear of Bullet. I smirked, giving Bullet one more shot at the engine before shutting down the big V8. Opening the trunk and grabbing my suitcase, I saw Kat open the door and step out of the car in just her swim trunks and tank top. I closed the trunk and walked over to her. Her face reflected disbelief mixed with several other emotions. I'm sure at this point I was still in shock. Yes, I was in shock. That's how I was still able to function. But no sooner had I entered the house than I dropped my suitcase and collapsed to my knees. The depth of what had happened finally sunk into my shock-numbed brain. I had been putting it off as long as I could, but now it all burst from my mind and spilled out. Heavy sobs shook my body and tears flowed freely, and I felt 2 long female arms encircle my shoulders. I clung desperately to her. It was only her presence that kept me in this world and kept me from completely withdrawing into myself. It's okay. It's going to be okay, Mac, she soothed. No, it won't. I shook my head. Yes, I was wallowing in self-pity. I admit that freely. In response, she pulled my head to her chest, and in that moment, I felt loved. The love of a very good friend, but at least I felt loved by someone. She lifted me to my feet and we went. Okay, she walked, and I stumbled into the living room and collapsed on her big leather couch. Hey, we can watch Darius play. The Dodgers are playing the Braves in Atlanta tonight. She was trying to cheer me up, since she knows how much I love baseball. I snorted like a kid. Okay, I guess it can't hurt. I tried to smile, but it ended up being more of a grimace. She turned on the TV. The game was on in the 4th inning in Atlanta. The score was already 4-2 in favor of the Dodgers. That cheered me up and took my mind off my own problems. Kat brought us both a beer, and we watched the game together. The game went back and forth for a while, but we ended up winning in extra innings. At the end, we laughed and cheered when Darius caught the ball to end the game and get another great win over the Dodgers. I was taking a big sip of the local microbrew when suddenly Kat's laughter stopped. You've got to be kidding me, she exclaimed loudly, her mouth open with shock, and she stared daggers at the TV. I followed her gaze and saw Darius kissing some woman. Maybe there's something in the water? I asked aloud. It was all I could think of to say, seeing my relationship with Kat go down the drain along with my marriage. There must be medicine spiked in that damn water, she growled. I glared at her, and the fire in her dark brown eyes made me nervous. And a white woman. That son of a bitch. He said he doesn't even like white women. I listened to her piss him off for about 20 minutes. Then she looked at me and broke into her own sobs. I returned the favor by hugging her while she spewed it all out. When she cried out, she looked up at me with bloodshot eyes that almost mirrored my own. Look at us, huh? Two of the same damn kind. She laughed sadly, and I smiled too as a few stray tears ran down my face. Well, at least Maggie did it with me alone. I shrugged. That bastard did it on national television. I'm so sorry, Kat. It's not your fault, honey. She hugged me tightly, then reached for her cell phone. Sorry, I'll call his cheating ass and tell him what time it is. No problem. I nodded as she hit the speed dial button for his number. Hey, Darius. Uh-huh. Yeah, we were watching the game. Max here since his cheating bitch wife is divorcing him and kicked him out. No, he's staying with me for a few days. Until he finds a place of his own. No, and that's why I'm calling you. I saw you playing with that slut's tonsils. She stopped and listened for a few seconds, rolling her eyes. She silently put her finger to her lips and pressed the speaker button so I could listen. I nodded in understanding. But baby, I'm just playing. I have needs, you know. She doesn't mean anything to me. I just need a little something on the side while I'm on the road. You should know that. The asshole whined and grimaced. Dumbass didn't belong in the Dodgers now, as far as I was concerned. Well, Darius, we're done now. She said it with iron hardness in her voice. I'm sending all the crap you left here to your place in LA. I don't want to see you or hear about you or anything else. You feel me? But baby, he began, desperation in his voice. Nah. You lost the right to call me baby when you muzzled that whore on national television. I don't play that shit. It's over between us. D-O-N-E. We're done. F-I-N-I-S-H-E-D. Get that into your head right now. Goodbye, Darius. I hope that bitch was worth it. Before he could whimper anymore, Kat ended the call and blocked his number. She looked at me and smirked evilly. Well, there you go. Zero tolerance. I nodded. Zero tolerance. I agree, Kat. Cheaters don't deserve a second chance. So what's she doing with the divorce? Don't tell me she's going to hand you over to the divorce. I swear I'll knock the blonde off her head. Kat always turned me on with her euphemisms, and I smirked when I heard this one. Weird, but no. She wants $2,200 a month in alimony, probably so I don't try to stop her from remarrying as soon as possible, but otherwise her proposed arrangement is very fair. I shrugged. I was covered in tears and had entered the acceptance phase of grief from the divorce. Okay, acceptance wasn't quite that. I wanted to make them pay, and now that I was thinking clearly, a plan was maturing in my head. It depended on a few things, like who would cater their wedding, but the more I ran it through my head, the better I felt. So she must be serious about this asshole? Did she tell you who it was? Asked Kat. Yeah, and you're going to love it. Reginald Pennington and 4. I smirked. Kat's eyes widened. Damn. I never would have mistaken Maggie for a gold digger. Me neither until now. Apparently she fooled everyone. I shrugged. Her parents never liked me, so I'm sure they pushed her into it, at least a little. I was never good enough for their favorite. Okay, I have to admit that for a moment I let my bitterness show. Well, screw them. Kat shrugged. I can see the wheels turning, Mac. What are you planning? Kat could always tell when I was thinking intensely. She often noticed it at work when I had to solve some problem in the store or factory. Revenge of monumental proportions. I smiled serenely, telling her, just trust me. It will make a lasting impression on them for the rest of their lives. Okay, I'm almost afraid to ask. What do you already have? Kat was already giggling. I laid out my basic plan to her and she burst into a gut-wrenching laughter. "You're just crazy," she squealed, tears of laughter streaming down her face. "Okay, we need to figure out how to do this shit." So we did. We stayed up drinking beer and working out a plan of action to organize the wedding. We decided that in 3 months, since I wasn't going to fight the divorce, they would get married 6 months after that. We would be ready, and if I could stay cordial with Maggie and even Reginald, I could get to the wedding without disrupting it. By the time I got my suitcase and bag into the guest room, it was well past midnight. I told Kat I'd be late at the store since I had to meet Tim in the morning to sign the divorce papers, and she understood. She said she would do everything until I got there, or I could take the day off if I wanted. I slept surprisingly well that night. Maybe it was the beer we drank in moderation, or maybe it was the twisted and devious plan I devised to make Reginald and Maggie's wedding a unforgettable event. An unforgettable event. Either way, I was pleased with what we'd come up with. I got up early and with a smile on my face. I heard the sounds of scrambled eggs and bacon sizzling on the stove, and the smell woke me up even more. She also had fresh coffee brewing, and that was even better. I couldn't remember the last time Maggie had made me breakfast, but damn. Kat was cooking, and we were just temporary roommates. I showered and got dressed in a t-shirt and jeans, since I didn't feel like going to the store after seeing Tim. Then I joined Kat in the kitchen. "Good morning, Kat." I smiled, sitting down on a bar stool in her kitchen nook. "Good morning, sunshine." She bestowed a dazzling smile on me. "You look much better this morning than you did last night." "Thanks to you and the beer." I nodded my thanks, which caused me to laugh musically. I had to laugh too, since Kat's laughter was contagious. "Well, here's some scrambled eggs and bacon for you, honey. Are you coming to work after your meeting with Tim?" She set a plate and a mug of coffee in front of me. "Thanks, Kat. No, I think I'll take the day off. I don't know how I'll react after meeting Maggie and her lawyer at the signing." I shrugged. "Tell you what, I'll take you to lunch later and tell you what happened." Kat nodded. "You'd better, Mac. Hell, I'm glad I'm not going with you. If I saw that bitch, I'd probably beat the shit out of her." "That's one of the reasons I love you, sweetheart." I smirked. "You're the most loyal person I know." "Oh, I love you too, boss." She smiled sweetly as I stood up and gave me a hug. Kat is only 1 inch shorter than me, so her whole body was pressed against mine, and we hugged in solidarity. "Hey, both of our exes cheated. I'm glad you're doing well too," I told her, pulling her against me and then letting her go. "At least they didn't cheat on each other. Now that would be a cliché." She snorted and I had to laugh. "True. But for both of us to find out on the same day? The biggest one. Coincidence. Never." I did my best to mimic the comic book guy. Kat and I both loved The Simpsons, so she knew what was up right away and laughed out loud, clapping me on the shoulder. "You're right, Mac. That's a hell of a coincidence, which makes that cheating drug in the water even more plausible." "You and your conspiracy theories." I rolled my eyes, bestowing her with a cheerful smile. "Hey, the truth is out there somewhere." Kat threw me a creepy look. When we finished cleaning and loading her dishwasher, she handed me the key to her apartment. "I was going to give it to Darius, but I think you'll need it more than he will." She smiled. "Thanks, Kat." I smiled, kissed her cheek again, and hugged her tightly. "Don't worry. I'll find a place of my own in a few days and stop bothering you." "No need to hurry, Mac," she assured me. "Trust me, darling. I'd rather have you around where I can keep an eye on you than alone, where God only knows what you'll be doing on your own. My parents went through a divorce, and I know how Dad took it when Mom left him. I'm not letting you out of my sight." "Okay, Mom." I smirked, and she gave me a cheeky grin and rubbed my shoulder. I'd heard about what had happened and how her mom was mentally drained. She hadn't cheated on Kat's dad, but she had other personality and mental health issues that had led her to alcohol and her eventual divorce from him. I didn't know all the details, but it wasn't as sad as my own situation. However, her father took it hard. Speaking of our relationship, Kat and I have known each other for 20 years. She's 2 years older than me, but as a kid, she kept her eyes on me at school. I was smaller than the other boys then, so I was often teased. Kat was taller than most boys and girls and was well on her way to Amazon status. She stood up for me, and no one wanted to test her strength. But she didn't just react to it. She taught me how to stand up for myself. She taught me how to fight dirty, because my family didn't do that. She learned from a young age how to take care of herself. By the time we became teenagers, I had finally grown up enough to be an inch taller than her. Barely. The last growth spurt came in my sophomore year of high school, and Kat had stopped growing by then. Her height was 6 feet, and mine was 6 feet 1 inch, and we've stayed that way ever since. We have both gotten fatter since the beanpole days, but we are still in good shape. She was a hurdler on the track team, and I played baseball. But while Kat was good enough to earn a scholarship to UCLA, I wasn't good enough at baseball to earn a scholarship. So I went into the Army instead, and then used my GI Bill to get into school. When I opened the chocolate store shortly before I married Maggie, Kat applied to be manager. She had an MBA, and I quickly took it. I couldn't pay her much the first year, but once word of mouth spread, we had almost more business than we could handle. I was able to bring in some great people to work with me, and Kat was and still is the best of them. I left her in charge after a year to take Maggie on our belated honeymoon. During those 2 weeks, Kat worked like silk, and within a year we were able to pay off our bank loan, and I could even afford to give everyone a raise. By the end of the 3rd year, I had a miniature factory attached to my store with a large kitchen and everything I needed. I had several contracts for cocoa beans and was able to bring in some good exotic blends. In our 5th year of operation, we were sending special orders for candy all over California, but I steadfastly refused to franchise or anything like that. Nevertheless, we became almost special order only. I was offered millions for my company, but I and my employees refused to sell. They decided they didn't want to work for anyone but me. If I sold the store, all my people would quit. That was the deciding factor for me. I was going to keep the business small with my 20 employees, and we were just going to have fun and make money doing it. That, as it turned out, was the final nail in the lid of my coffin as far as my in-laws were concerned. Maggie's father wanted to buy my business and expand it. I politely but firmly turned him down, saying I wanted to keep the business small with a family feel. He lit me up by saying that expansion was the only way to make serious money. I firmly and not too politely replied that I was already making serious money, but I didn't want to be greedy like he was. I thought about what they would think about Maggie cheating on me with him and then divorcing me in favor of Reginald Tiny, and realized that I didn't care, but they would probably approve. Old money attracts old money, and the Sullivans, though not as wealthy as the Penningtons, were still old money. To hell with it. That morning, Kat and I parted ways after breakfast. She went to work and I went to see Tim at his office. Maggie hadn't shown up yet when I got there, so we chatted until she arrived. When she walked in, Tim visibly tensed up. I realized from his gesture that Maggie and her lawyer weren't the only people present. I stood up and turned around, and sure enough, there was little Pennington himself. At that moment, all I wanted to do was wipe the smug grin off his face. But I ignored his handshake and looked at Maggie. Well, let's get this over with. I shrugged. Tim explained the proposed split and everything else. Since my business wasn't funded by her money or her family's money, and the house had been gifted to her after her grandparents died, it wasn't community property and belonged to us. My Mustang, of course, was mine. I had restored it back in high school. Tim surprised me. So you are divorcing my client to marry Reginald Pennington of 4. Is that correct, Mrs. McDougal? The question caught her off guard. Well, she hesitated. A simple yes or no will suffice, please. Tim kept up with her. Her lawyer, a wannabe Gloria Allred, leaned over and whispered something in Maggie's ear. Yes, she said quietly, lowering her eyes as if she was ashamed. Tim had never called her Mrs. McDougal. "And how soon were you planning on getting married?" continued Tim. Maggie, Reggie, and Gloria Jr. were now in an embrace. They were whispering fiercely among themselves. Tim took this opportunity to lean over and whisper in my ear, "Alimony." I just nodded back and smiled. He was trying to get me not to pay her a dime. When the three hiccups interrupted their embrace, Maggie looked at Tim again. "As soon as possible, after the divorce is final. We've already planned most of the wedding." Tim nodded. "And if these reports are correct," he pulled out a detailed financial report on the Reggie boy. "Mr. Pennington by himself, not including the numerous houses and cars he owns, is solvent by almost $1 billion. I ask you, Mrs. McDougal, why would you want an honest, hard-working man like your husband to pay you child support when you can just ask Mr. Pennington for any money you want to spend?" Maggie found herself pulled back into an embrace with Gloria Jr. and El Culo. Tim sent me a lightning grin, and I returned mine while the three amigos discussed their next moves. When they came out of their embrace, Gloria Jr. spoke up. "What would you suggest as adequate compensation?" she asked, fixing her stern gaze on me. "Well, she can have all the furniture, not just her half. I don't care about that." I shrugged. And back into the huddle, dear friends. This time the whispers were more muffled, but eventually they broke apart and looked at Tim. "Agreed," said bitch lawyer. "That's the way it worked out. I didn't have to pay child support, but I didn't get the furniture either." Gloria Jr. made the necessary changes to the divorce papers. We all signed, except Snake Boy, and the filing took place the same day bitch lawyer Feminazi left. As I was walking back to my car, Maggie and Bastard came up to me. "Angus, old boy, I hope you didn't take offense." Again, he held out his hand for me to shake. It came out like this. I took his hand and squeezed it very hard so that his face contorted with pain. "You call me Angus again, Reginald, and I'll make your life a living hell. I'm Mr. McDougal to you, understand?" Yes, Mr. McDougal. Let me go, please." There was genuine fear on his face. I let go of his arm before the gangrene set in, and he breathed a sigh of relief. "That's for calling me Angus," I said evenly. "As for the whore, no hard feelings." I smiled, turned, and walked to my car. I felt good now. I had somehow gotten rid of the alimony payment and was essentially free of it once the divorce was finalized. Oh, that reminds me. I turned back to them as Maggie was helping Osceolio to his feet. "Maggie, before I go, I need to return my grandmother's wedding ring." I held out my hand. Maggie looked at me like I had just fallen off another planet. Then she took it and her wedding ring off and held them out to me. "Thank you." I smiled, nodded at them, put both rings in my pocket, and walked back to my car. I started the powerful V8 and shifted it into gear, depressed the clutch and stepped on the gas. The car shrieked its tires as I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving rubber on the pavement and a little smoke in the air. I didn't do this often, but I wanted to send a loud and clear message to these two lovebirds. I looked in the rear view and Asshole was standing stunned, still clutching his right hand. I grinned happily as I drove to the store. When I got there, Kat was happy to see me, as was everyone else. They all came over and hugged me or shook my hand and said they were sorry. I thanked them all and told them to go back to work. However, I said it with a smile on my face so they knew I appreciated their efforts to help me feel better. The thing is, I was already feeling pretty darn good. Aside from paying my lawyer and half the legal fees and having to give up my half of the furniture I never liked anyway, I'd managed to pull off a bloodless divorce. "Come on, Kat," I said. "Let's go out to lunch." I drove us there in the Bullet, and Kat loved riding in it. She could hear the engine rumbling under the hood and feel the power coming off of it, like an aura of coolness. We ate and laughed, two old friends, sharing our meal and our friendship, and the new growing bonds of recently committed love. I still can't believe I had no idea she was cheating on me. I finally hissed, letting on that I couldn't realize how blind Maggie was. I must have really been stupid. No, Mac, you were in love. Love can blind us, you know. Kat smiled and reached across the table, squeezing my hand. I smiled in spite of myself. Thanks, Kat. I squeezed her hand in return, letting her know how much I appreciated everything she'd done for me, both professionally and personally. She was more than just an office manager and friend to me. I had come to depend on her a long time ago. First in school, when I was a little kid who was smaller than the rest of the class. Then I became a man who wanted his business to succeed and hired her as the most suitable and qualified of all the applicants. You never have to thank me, Mac. A nice bonus at the end of the year is thanks enough. She grinned, and I immediately laughed. Consider it done. I smiled and looked into her dark brown eyes with my dark blue ones. She looked away, and I noticed a slight blush on her caramel face. It made me confused, but I quickly came to my senses. I ordered myself to stop. She's my friend, and she too had just suffered a loss. In all the years of our friendship, I had never looked at Kat like that. Never in my life had I seen her as anything but a friend, albeit a very beautiful friend. Of course, I noticed that she was very well put together, just as I had the previous evening at her house when I pulled up to the house and she came out to meet me. Heck, what red-blooded American male wouldn't pay attention to a gorgeous Amazon like her? But that was just what us guys do. It was, different. I realized I wasn't ready for that, and we quickly went back to other topics. After we ate lunch, I drove her back to the store and dropped her off. She said she would see me at home, so I drove to the bluff and looked out at the Pacific Ocean. As I looked down at my left hand, I took off the ring that had been there for the past 8 years. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Maggie's engagement ring. I studied them both, and the mere sight of them made me sick. I then pulled out my grandmother's engagement ring and held all three in my hands. I put the engagement ring back in my pocket and tossed the wedding bands as hard as I could into the ocean. They sparkled in the sun, flying over the cliffs and into the white water, crashing against the rocks below. It was symbolic to me. My marriage was dead, and that was the autopsy. Of course, the divorce was still to come, but it was something I had to do for my own peace of mind and to be able to move on with my life. Just because I gave a eulogy for my marriage didn't mean I had given up on my plan to get revenge on Maggie and Reggie. I remembered a line from the song Violence and Bloodshed. Payback's a bitch, and I'll pay for everything. I smiled when I heard Scott Columbus on drums of death, Eric Adams screaming the lyrics, Joey DeMeo on bass, and Ross Boss on lead guitar. Oh yeah. Reggie will pay for stealing my wife from me, and my wife will pay for being a gold-digging whore. Some would call me vindictive and a caveman. I'll just say, to hell with you. Walk 20 miles in my boots, and then judge me. Next chapter. 3 months later, everything was settled. The joint bills were split 50-50. All this time, Kat and I lived as roommates and got along just fine. No one at work cared that we were living together. It was a huge surprise when we came home one evening and found wedding invitations in the mail. Maggie wasn't kidding. They had scheduled the wedding a month after the divorce was officially finalized. I smiled at Kat, and she smiled back. Okay, time to go, I said angrily, driving us to Costco. Finding a caterer for the wedding was easy. He had wanted to do business with us months ago, but it had fallen through. I decided to, give him another chance and make the arrangements myself this time. It really made me laugh that Maggie was going to wear white, just like Reggie in his Navy suit. He was a naval aviator in the early days of the war, and I was in Captain Drake's Alpha Squadron. This jackass couldn't even seem to put on a proper black tuxedo. A few nights before the wedding, I made a visit to the candy store and replaced the chocolate cake mix with my own. I grinned like the Cheshire Cat, replacing the cake mix with chocolate cake mix flavored with something extra. No, it wasn't poison. It was something that would make Maggie and Reggie's wedding unforgettable for everyone involved. What I was doing was comparable to a high school prank, only much more stylish. But damn it, I had to get even. They hung horns on me for 8 months until I got the divorce papers. True, she behaved very conciliatory in the divorce, and all I was left with was a broken heart. However, that heartbreak was going to cost them dearly. I kept Kat in the loop on what was going on, and she laughed really hard when I told her that Operation Mudbound had begun. The Mudbound had taken place. The invitation included the reception where the real fun would begin. The morning of the wedding, Kat and I showered at the same time, and no, we did not shower together. We had grown closer over the past few months, though. However, we were still shy about the relationship, and I, for one, was afraid of ruining our friendship by taking it to the next level. I'm just glad she installed those tankless water heaters. Changing into my Armani suit, I waited in the living room for Kat to be ready. "So, do I look presentable?" she asked, as I watched the UCLA football game. I turned to look at her and my jaw dropped to the floor. In front of me was a vision of beauty that is hard to describe, but I'm going to try anyway. Kat was wearing an emerald green dress that fit her curves like a glove. The shimmering material clung to her as if she was in love with her body and didn't want to part with it. Her hair was styled in a shoulder-length style that framed her beautiful face perfectly. Her full, luscious lips were painted a sultry red color, and her green eyeshadow complemented her dress perfectly. She was wearing 1-inch shoes, which put her in line with me. Her taut calves were on display, and the 1-inch shoes showed them off perfectly. Her lush bust was barely contained by the top of her dress, and as she spun around, I had a view of her caramel-colored back. Good Lord. "You look amazing," I said when I was finally able to form coherent words. She smiled a perfect smile. "Thanks, Mac. You look pretty damn good yourself." I blushed at those words. "Thanks, Kat," I said as we walked out the door. We drove to the church. Ironically, Billy Idol's song "White Wedding" was playing on the radio. As the Bullet pulled into the parking lot, people turned around and stared at us as the big V8 heralded our arrival. All the guests except us were old money. Oh, this was going to be even more fun than I had envisioned. We showed our invitations to the bouncer at the entrance. Okay, bouncer is probably too generous an expression. Apparently, he was one of Reggie's goons who accompanied him to public events. It seems the Penningtons had made enemies over the years in their business practices, which necessitated the no-necks. This didn't surprise me in the least. Reggie Boy's family adheres to the do unto others so they won't do unto you school of thought, their version of the golden rule. Or, he who owns the gold makes the rules. And judging by the disdainful looks Kat and I received from the snobby elite, I felt even better about what was to come on this beautiful day. As we took our seats in the pews, I leaned over to Kat and whispered in her ear, "Remember, you can't eat anything chocolate at the reception." To this, she giggled softly and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. The service was long and boring, a typical Catholic wedding. I had to fight a few times to stay awake, but no matter. Reggie looked, admittedly, very dressy in his Navy uniform. Another reason to hate him. He'd been a naval officer before retiring to go into business with his family. His Annapolis-acquired ring sparkled and shimmered as he waited for Maggie to walk down the aisle. Then the wedding march played, and there she was, walking down the aisle with her snobbish father by her side. I remembered our wedding and the way he'd scowled at me the whole time. Now he was glowing with pride that his darling daughter was finally marrying a man in his own circle. I wanted to punch the asshole in the face, but I refrained. I'd pay for it at the reception. And so it was. I won't bore you with the mundane details of the wedding vows, which she didn't take seriously the first time, the ring exchange, which she ruined with her affair with asshole, and all that. And then I got an Oscar, Emmy, Tony, and Golden Globe for Best Actor when I congratulated them both at the reception. Kat would win the Best Actress award because she took Maggie's betrayal of me as a betrayal of everyone who worked for me, and she loved her like a sister too. Reggie once again rubbed it in my face. Angus, old boy, I hope you really don't have any hard feelings. In the end, the better man wins. It took all my self-control not to plow him to the ground and make his plastic surgeon a very rich man with a complete facelift. Instead, I said, "You're right. The better man won." Whereupon I grabbed a slightly surprised Cat and kissed her. Cat froze for a moment and then enthusiastically returned my kiss. Right there in front of Reggie and Maggie. Yes, the best man did win. She winked and left the happy couple standing there with their mouths open. We grinned as we took our seats and ate our lobster dinner. It was pretty darn tasty. Then it was time for the real entertainment. The wedding cake was brought out. Reggie and Maggie ceremoniously cut the cake and also ceremoniously put the cake on the face of both of them. Everyone was laughing and people came up to take a piece of cake for themselves. We decided to wait for the end of the line as it was going to be one heck of a show. Of course, as soon as we got to the cake itself, the heckling started. It started with the bride farting, and not just any quiet fart. It could be heard from all around the dining room. It was followed by a resounding fart from the groom himself. I glanced in their direction and said loudly, "You apologize," which elicited a few chuckles from the snobby elite around me. They weren't going to get away with it, though. Then a surprised expression appeared on Maggie's face. A gurgling sound escaped her, quickly followed by an expression of pure horror. Reginald's face creased as he smelled something foul, and then a gurgling sound of his own came out of his ass. They looked at each other in horror as the farts and gurgles reached the rest of the guests. Maggie and Reggie jumped to their feet as quickly as possible, and I saw brown liquid dripping from under her dress onto the floor, while Reggie tried to hide the sprawling brown stain on the back of his white pants. Both were in a mad rush to the bathroom, and more guests soon followed when they realized they had just crapped their pants. Kat and I left quickly and quietly and were already sitting in the bullet when we couldn't hold back our laughter any longer. We both had tears streaming down our faces as we nearly busted our guts from laughing. "Oh my God, Mac!" Kat laughed and then grabbed her stomach, gasping for air with laughter. I laughed just as hard as she did. "You think I use too much?" I said, between fits of tear-filled laughter. "How fast does that shit work?" She laughed again. "Well, the boxes at Costco said it worked well, but you shouldn't use too much of it." I hummed when our laughter finally subsided a little. "How many boxes did you pour into the cake mix?" she asked incredulously. "All of them." I smiled serenely, causing Kat to nearly die laughing again. I used a powdered chocolate-flavored laxative and poured it into the boxes of cake mix that the suppliers had set aside for the Penningtons' wedding. The cake and cupcakes were almost pure laxative, as I threw away most of the cake mix boxes and replaced them with powdered laxative. I also threw in some regular cake mix so it wasn't too strong. But holy crap, I didn't expect it to work so fast. It was just the icing on the cake. Ha ha. That evening, I went to a supplier, ostensibly to contract with him for the chocolate my factory was producing. He had contacted me months before, and I had promised to get back to him. I told him that we were a little delayed due to the illness of several members of my team, but once we resumed work, I was able to take him some samples. He had a greedy look in his eyes as he thought I was going to give him what he wanted. When he gave me a tour of the establishment, he showed me the kitchen and even mentioned that they were catering the Penningtons' wedding. I already knew that, of course, but he didn't know that the bride was my gold-digging, cheating ex-wife. I was on my best behavior, but as soon as he told his men to finish their work, he shook my hand and went back to his office. He said he would take care of finalizing the contract and would let Tim and me know when it was ready. However, it seems to me that in the few days since the wedding, he had completely forgotten about the contract. Once everyone had left and I left his office, I headed to the back door to the kitchen, propped it open, and went to my car. I replaced the powdered cake mix with powdered chocolate laxatives and drove off. I made sure the door to the kitchen was locked and made sure there were no boxes left behind that I had taken with me. Captain Drake taught us back when I was in the service. Never leave a trail behind you. He's a good guy. Last I heard, he resigned his commission and is now a history professor at UCLA. By the day of the wedding, all the evidence was gone. Only Kat and I knew about the plan, and she kept quiet. When Kat and I got back to my apartment, she looked at me seriously. "Mac, that kiss," she began. "Kat, I know I overreacted, but you're so beautiful and I couldn't help myself." "Let me finish. You're a good person. What I'm trying to say is that I think we'd be good together." She blushed slightly. We spent the rest of the day and night together. Needless to say, I didn't have any questions. One might ask why I had made such an arrangement with the caterer. The problem was that Sal, the owner of the restaurant, had lashed out at Kat when she first came to negotiate with him when he first expressed interest in our business. After slapping Sal on the head when he got too divisive, she came back and said we shouldn't do business with him. That all changed when they were announced as caterers for the Penningtons' wedding, and I saw an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. The response from the Brown wedding, as the press put it, was instantaneous. The news channels and newspapers reported it the next day, and there were great pictures and video of the bride, groom, and guests running to the restrooms in the dining room. I invited all the guys and girls from the store to Kat's house to watch the festivities. We weren't shown in any of the scenes, but everyone knew we were there. We all laughed so hard we cried when members of the snobby elite ran to the restrooms like their asses were exploding. Needless to say, many of the upper-crust snobs were thoroughly embarrassed by the footage of them trying to keep the brown stuff from stinking too badly. The only people I felt sorry for were the cleaners who had to clean up the mess afterward. Of course, about a week after the wedding fiasco, the cops swooped in with questions. Kat and I had attended the wedding, but said we left when the shitstorm happened because we were worried about our health. We kept straight faces during the interrogations and died laughing only after the detectives left. We never heard from them again. Reggie Boy sued the supplier, but Sal didn't want to pay the lawsuit and left the country. Last we heard, he flew to Italy, where he was from. I don't know what became of him after that. Reginald Pennington IV was caught in bed with another man's wife less than a year after they were married. Who caught him? Her husband, and he wasn't too nice to Reggie. He called Maggie, and Maggie arrived at her resentful hubby's house and said a lot of interesting things to Reggie. Not long after that, Maggie showed up on the doorstep of our new home. At least Reginald was spared the loss of a testicle in the fight that followed. It seemed that while she had no problem cheating herself, she had absolutely no tolerance for her hubby cheating on her. Kind of a double standard, don't you think? Yes, Kat and I moved into a bigger place, as her small two-bedroom wasn't big enough. Our new abode was a 4-bedroom ranch, and by the end of the first year I had halfway paid it off. It seems Reggie had Maggie sign a prenup stating that if she filed for divorce for any reason, she would get nothing but what she brought to the marriage. She was left with a $125,000 a year job, but that was it. No billions for Maggie Sullivan. Late the next year, we heard a knock on the door. Kat was 4 months pregnant, so I gave her a quick kiss and jumped up to answer the door myself. A crying Maggie met me at the door. "What do you need, Maggie?" I asked in a neutral tone. "I'm so sorry, Mac. I'm sorry for everything," she sobbed. "Hey, you're the one who wanted to switch." I shrugged. "What happened?" "I caught Reginald cheating," she admitted, sobbing even harder. "Wow, hard hit," said I sarcastically. "Mac, I'm really sorry. I was wondering if there was any chance." She interrupted, seeing a pregnant cat coming up behind me. "Baby, who's that?" asked Kat, walking beside me. She smiled at Maggie. "It's Maggie, she was just leaving," I said, slamming the door in my ex's face. I slid the deadbolt shut and took Kat in my arms. "She's the past. You are my future. I love you, sweetheart." "I love you too, baby," she said. Kat and I eloped shortly after we found out she was pregnant. A small civil ceremony which was her idea, and we became husband and wife. She is still my manager at the store, and she is still one of my best friends. I love my wife. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.